Hello and welcome to Rushing the Field, a weekly national college football show with myself, Nicole Auerbach, and Joshua Perry. We are well into the season. It is like almost November already. We are already planning our Halloween episode next week. We are already planning our overreactions to the first college football playoff rankings. But Joshua, it is heating up. Like, we have seen coaches get fired, coordinators get fired. Like, it is crunch time now. And so the stakes are really high as we get into week nine. Here we are.
Sure. Wherever we are. Why not? Listen, I would argue that the stakes have never really felt like they were higher, and everybody said it was not going to feel this way. With all of the changes that came to college football, we were sold this idea that the game would never be the same. The regular season wouldn't be so exciting. The games wouldn't matter. People still saying that, which is crazy, by the way. And here we are, all with the same emotions and probably even more intense because it's felt like we've had so many big matchups. It is going fast. College football, please slow down. I'll miss you so much when you're gone. But this season's delivered. I'm excited to dive into what we have today.
Yeah, the one part, like, this is always like such a short season. It will feel a little bit longer because of the playoff, Army-Navy, which could be a rematch. Like, there's a lot going on in December this year that we'll get into, and we'll, of course, be covering here on Rushing the Field. But let's get into the news of the week, the ticket stub, our entry point into the pod. Let's start with that first spate of firings. So Will Hall was fired at Southern Miss. You had Oklahoma firing offensive coordinator Seth Littrell after we talked about this on the show, just abysmal offensive showings for them. And then Utah's offensive coordinator Andy Ludwig, which should be a familiar name for Notre Dame fans who almost got him a few years back. He has stepped down at Utah again after they've really, really struggled and basically struggled the last few years whenever Cam Rising was not in the game. So we're starting to see some of those changes. And Joshua, we had been talking about this, and we'll get to Michigan later in the show, but Michigan and Oklahoma, these were situations that it was going to be very hard to make a head coaching change, or basically impossible, and you wouldn't do it in the first place, but you had to make some coordinator changes. So we did see that in Norman already.
Yes, and we even through Florida State in that conversation, we were having it too, in the potential for them to start making some changes down the line. I agree with Michigan, again, not to jump ahead too far, but the idea that Oklahoma would have to make a move should not shock anybody. And let's think about how they got here. So Dylan Gabriel left, right? And we can argue about why he left. They've made it pretty clear, Brent Venables and company, that they believed that he was going to be on the way out regardless, but he was gone. But we were given this idea that Jackson Arnold was going to be like the next great quarterback in college football. And we saw him in the bowl game, and he had a little turnover issue there, but we were like, oh man, first time really seeing him, it's not that big a deal. It was that big a deal. They have been abysmal offensively. Jackson Arnold is not the only issue, in all fairness. The offensive line has not really blocked very well. It just doesn't feel like they're super explosive in any regard. And so it would make sense to me that Oklahoma, with the defense who's played pretty well this year, would say that, listen, we got to do something pretty drastic here because we can't get rid of the head coach. The Utah thing is super interesting to me. I think it does make sense. But to your point, Ludwig was a guy who was like pretty well respected and pursued at times.
Big name. A big name coordinator.
Yeah, and Utah is a program that I think we equate with stability, and stable programs usually don't have coordinators stepping down in the middle of the year. So both of these stand out for different reasons.
For sure, and we'll continue to track them. Sundays are going to be very important moving forward. We've talked about this, though, as we kind of adjust to this new world. There might be more later changes just because of who's available, who's going to be coaching in the college football playoff. That's something that we haven't had before. Usually there would be multiple firings by now because guys wanted to get their new head coach in before the portal opens in December, before early signing period. That might not happen this year, just expectation setting. All right, let's get into number 2. This one's exciting. Our show is called Rushing the Field, so we are going to highlight an amazing field storm, a well-deserved one. Kennesaw State, previously winless on the season, had never beaten an FBS team in their transition up to FBS. First ever win in school history on Wednesday night. And they do it by beating previously unbeaten Liberty and knocking them out of the CFP picture. They rushed the field. It was an incredible scene for Kennesaw State. And it was just one of those moments. Like, Joshua, we talk about this. This is why we love college football. It's why it's unique. It's why it's the best. This was wildly unpredictable. It was like a 25.5 point spread going into this game, winless, fully beaten. and it delivered, and it was just incredible. So shout out to the Owls as they're transitioning up to FBS, getting that first FBS win, and getting it like in very dramatic fashion. Like Liberty would have had to go perfect this season. We saw them do it last year, and that's what it would have taken to get the CFP G5 spot, and now they can't because Kennesaw State.
Yeah, I had them as my my G5 champ at the beginning of the year, so they're completely out there. It's a wild thing, right? And again, like college football this year has given us results that nobody would have anticipated. Like if you would have told me that a team who had not won a game on the year, just transitioned to FBS, was going to beat Liberty, who for the last couple of years has really been like the successful G5 team, and part of its schedule and who they have to play. But like they've done what they need, but they did what they needed to do against their schedule. Not in this scenario, and I'm here for it. Like let's get a little bit more chaos as the season comes to an end.
Last note, this is more of a serious one and just kind of a huge bummer for someone who's been a great college football player, given us so many moments. Mostly at Coastal Carolina, where we saw him kind of really captivate the nation. But Grayson McCall, who's currently at NC State, he is retiring from football following his latest head injury that he suffered earlier this month. We all saw that really hard hit he took, and he had to be helped off the field. He posted to Instagram, "I have battled injuries my whole career, but this is one I cannot come back from. Brain specialist, my family, and I have come to the conclusion that it is in my best interest to hang the cleats up." So just absolutely a heartbreaking moment for someone who has had a history of concussions and has had these, these moments and these injuries that have really derailed his career. But he has been such a joy to have in college football. Wishing him all the best, and hopefully that he stays healthy in his life post football. But just wanted to give him a proper send off because he's meant a lot. He's been one of those guys, one of those names, one of those quarterbacks in college football in this era.
Yeah, I mean, his time at Coastal had a lot of people watching games in time slots they wouldn't typically be watching. He was phenomenal, great ambassador for the game, as you mentioned there. This is something that I resonate with. I left the game of football because of concussions, and it's a very difficult decision. And the thing that is hard about it is, a lot of times when guys get banged up and they have to leave, it's like, their knees still hurts or their shoulders still gives them trouble. At some point, like you feel fine and you look fine, but that you can't go out there, and it's a dangerous thing to do. So I have a lot of respect for him making that decision. It's certainly tough. Hopefully his community around him is really embracing him right now, so he can transition out of the game properly. But I like the idea of a young person saying that I'm going to think about what the next chapter of my life looks like rather than trying to hold on to the dream. So ton of respect there, and hopefully everything is good for him into the future.
Absolutely. Tua maybe should think about it as well.
Yeah, my gosh, I know that's
a separate conversation.
Topic for a different day. That's really difficult to watch there. All right, let's transition here into some stock up, stock down. We're going to start with the stock up, and I put this one in the rundown. Let's go with Georgia for the first stock up here, and particularly the Georgia defense. It was a phenomenal performance. Heading into the game against Texas, I had talked about this idea of, well, Texas hasn't played an offense that I think could really challenge them. If they're going to have struggles in this game, it might be because of their defense. No. They struggled in that game because they could not block Georgia's front. Both of their quarterbacks got hit. Both of their quarterbacks put the football on the ground. Georgia was aggressive. They stopped the run game completely. That first half, the rushing stats were disgusting. And the second half wasn't much better. And I just feel like if Georgia in their best games can deliver that type of defense, even with Carson Beck looking a little icky right now, it's a really difficult team to try to beat.
This is the Georgia defense that we were expecting all season long, right? We were shocked to see Alabama just slicing through them, and how many ever 4 touchdowns in a row or whatever to open the game in Tuscaloosa a few weeks back. This is what you usually see from a Kirby Smart defense. And it's been up and down throughout the season, but absolutely up in this game. Like this was I know we've been using this term maybe to a cliche point, but like a welcome to the SEC moment. Like this is the gold standard in the sport and in this conference. And they just completely annihilated Texas's offense. We saw them get forced into a quarterback change, which creates a storyline to continue to follow. Yes, with Steve Sarkisian putting in Arch Manning because they really couldn't get anything going. Quinn Ewers didn't play well in that game. There was just a lot that didn't work. Huge credit to Georgia. But I do want to underscore, so it's like stock up with a little asterisk. I do think Carson Beck is playing worse than he did last year. Now. He is a problem. And I feel like he can be a limiting factor. He could lose them a playoff game. Like that's the level that he's playing at. And he's fortunate that they were up so comfortably in that game. He was playing terribly. And it was just because of the defense. And that the offense did enough. But that's something that I'm definitely concerned. I want to put a pin in because that's going to be a problem for them against some of these good teams later on in their schedule.
No, I mean, I totally agree with you. And I'm pulling up the stats right now for Carson Beck. So 175 yards, no touchdowns, 3 interceptions, 56% completion. Like it was a very bad stat line. And against Kentucky, his stat line was very similar to that. It just wasn't very good. And I do want to make a point about the Georgia defense here. In how much it made a difference in that game. The scoring drives for Georgia were not very long drives, right? Like 4 plays, 13 yards. They had a field goal, 7 plays, 13 yards, touchdown, 3 plays, 34 yards, a field goal, 7 plays, 25 yards, field goal, 4 plays, 4 yards. I mean, like this is ridiculous stuff. They had one long touchdown drive that was 11 plays and 89 yards. The defense really set them up to win that football game. But like, again, if you can give me that, then I think that you have a shot against anybody. Carson Beck's got to get much better, but like it was a revelation to me seeing this defense where I'm like, gosh, this looks like the Georgia championship teams.
Agree completely. Another team that's stock up, we've had them in both categories over the course of this season, is Colorado. Okay, so Travis Hunter's been banged up. He hasn't really been able to play much in the last 2 games, but they've already won more games than they did last year. Like we're seeing clear improvement from Colorado from last year to this year. And I think we thought maybe after the Nebraska game that the season was going to derail. And then we saw them crush UCF and we said, well, they could factor into the Big 12 race, either as a spoiler, maybe in the hunt, who knows? But like, I do think that this is an improving football team. Travis Hunter's supposed to be back and more healthy this weekend. He's maybe missed enough that he's maybe not going to win the Heisman.
Right.
Hopefully he still gets to New York. But the point is that this is a team that is doing something that I wasn't sure they were going to be able to do is surpass the win total from last year. They're very well positioned to go bowling this year in Coach Prime's second year.
Yeah, I think there are multiple things that can be true here. Like Coach Prime can be a polarizing loudmouth, and also he's a guy who has his team playing good football. I'm glad you brought up the Nebraska game, and I think that one was really concerning for folks who were trying to project what Colorado could look like this year, because it was an encapsulation of all the things that they didn't do very well a year ago. They couldn't run the football. The line of scrimmage was bad. Quarterback was getting hit too much, and Shedeur, regardless of how much he gets hit, like he was a phenomenal player a year ago. He's phenomenal this year, but like that was a real problem. And then defensively, they could not stop the run. They could not stop explosive plays. And we're like, man, they didn't do anything this offseason to get better. And a lot of us, including myself, were like, oh, probably another one of those whatever years. And like, hopefully they can try to cobble together a bowl type season, but I don't think they're going to get there. And to your point, now it's like, could they win the Big 12? Like we could see chaos in that conference. Like if they continue to win games, all of their goals are alive. So it's been impressive. It's been fun to watch. And I'm curious, right? Like this is the final stretch. It's a team that is not super deep to me. So I think like injuries and things can probably factor in more than it would for other football teams. But certainly they've quietly just like played much better football.
Yep. Absolutely. All right.
Let's get to this last one here. And I know you're excited about it. Yeah. So I'll tee you up on this, but you've got UNLV, Boise State. It's a group of 5 game of the year. Both of these teams have been a lot of fun to watch. You and I have talked about it. Like I'm staying up. I'm watching all of the late football. And that's exactly what we're going to do Friday night. So it's a good thing that we don't have a game in the noon window, because 10:30 Eastern, these two are going to be going toe-to-toe. You got Ashton Genty in this game, who has been phenomenal this year. Just give me your thoughts. What are you looking out for?
So first of all, it is the game of the year, and it has so much at stake, which is part of why I have been underscoring this about the new playoff format. we already saw the impact for the group of 5 in the early part of the season when they would pick up big non-conference wins. But the fact that we are circling this game and we are making the coffee, we are getting espresso, we are getting our Celsius ready, and like we're going to stay up for a 10:30 p.m. Eastern time kickoff on Friday night to watch
maybe
this
an
game.
espresso martini.
I think that might offset the caffeine, Joshua.
I don't know. Not for me, you know.
All right. I'll have my
Red Bull
Celsius.
vodka.
Red Bull. Okay, that's fair. As long as there's some caffeine in there. But like in seriousness, like this is must-see TV because you have a direct path to the playoff. Like we've been saying this about the Mountain West champion all year. They'd be really well positioned, especially if it's one of these two teams because of the way that they played in the non-conference. I mean, Boise right now, their only loss on the year is a 3-point loss to the current number 1 team in the country. That's a pretty good resume. And anyone who watches their film is blown away by Heisman, maybe front runner, Ashton Jeanty. And then UNLV has multiple Big 12 wins, big non-conference wins in their resume. So again, this is a huge game, a lot at stake, direct path to the playoff. And I think it's going to be a really interesting one because I'm just always fascinated to see anyone try to stop or slow Ashton Jeanty. He's so explosive. He has 8 touchdown runs of 50 plus yards, and he had a non-scoring touchdown run of 68 yards. He can do that at any point in the game. It feels like anytime you're watching something else while their game is on, they're cutting in with a long touchdown run by Ashton Jeanty because he's constantly doing that. And he's obviously averaging basically a first down per attempt. So that's what I'm always going to be most interested in any game with Boise State. But UNLV talked a lot about the quarterback situation. They've been very solid. And they have a good rushing defense. Like they're a very solid team. Barry Odom, great coach, well coached. They've been up for their big moments this season. So I just think it's going to be a really high quality game. And I just love that it is October and we have like a game of the year already.
Yeah, I'm totally there with you. And you mentioned like every kind of back and forth aspect of this game. I do want to make it clear though about the frustration of going against a player like Ashton Jeanty. The idea that you could do everything all game long to contain him, like you could contain him to 3 yards a carry for the whole game, and it just looms in the back of your mind that he could break a 50-yarder off. Like that is a really difficult task. You're asking guys to be so on point for 60 minutes because you know there's a running back who can absolutely take over the football game. It's a really daunting challenge just from the mental standpoint going in. And I'm curious to see what the game plan is because as you mentioned, the Rebels run defense has been pretty good this year. So that'll be a challenge for sure.
Yep. So that is it for Stock Up, which basically is just the group of 5 and the game of the year. Stock Up. We love that. We'll get into other game previews a little bit later, but first Stock Down. And it's funny we talked about the Colorado-Nebraska game, because I feel like we set these narratives for both of these programs that have drastically changed and veered into different directions since. So Nebraska is here because I went from being entirely confident that they would be bowl eligible by Halloween to now wondering, can they get bowl eligible? Like we're now in that position where they have the nation's longest streak of not playing in a bowl. And they're at 5 wins, which is the worst place to be because they were at this last year. And then they had a series of heartbreaking losses. They've got Ohio State, UCLA should be beatable. USC could be beatable. Wisconsin playing a lot better. Iowa, there's always a lot in that rivalry game. And Iowa, will be up for that game. It's just hard. Like there's not an obvious, again, when in the preseason, we were looking at the schedule, Indiana was the obvious, like, oh, yep, that's a win for sure. That gets them bowl eligible. And now you have this situation where Dylan Raiola has been really struggling for the last few weeks. And you just got crushed by Indiana in year 1 of a rebuild when you're supposed to be ahead of that in year 2 of a rebuild. So it's just a really tough situation for the Huskers that had so much positive momentum early in the season. And they're really in a lull right now. And I think Raiola particularly is. And I guess that's not terribly surprising because he is a true freshman.
Yeah. So let's just talk about this, like, path to getting to a bowl. So playing Ohio State and in the preseason, we had looked at this as like, oh man, both of these teams will probably be 7-0 coming into this game. Neither one is, by the way. Neither one is, by the way. And so like, OSU coming off of a bye week, like, they've been festering with that loss to Oregon. You've got this Nebraska team that just got their pants kicked in. And it's not a good opponent to have to play because it's still Ohio State, very talented team. So like that becomes more difficult. UCLA is a team that you should be able to beat, but we also saw UCLA beat Rutgers in a game that I don't think any of us thought the outcome was going to go that way, even with some of the injuries Rutgers had. So like antennas go up a little bit. USC has not played well. They're a very talented team. Wisconsin's a matchup opponent. Iowa's a matchup opponent. Like these games are tricky. I do think they get to bowl eligibility. I think they could probably pull off at least 2 more wins this season.
I do too.
It's certainly like a weird spot for them to be in. So there's that. The Dylan Raiola piece is so intriguing because I feel like we need to have a legitimate conversation about Dylan Raiola. And I think he has played impressive football for a freshman. I don't think it's been impressive football after the first couple of weeks. And I think that's actually okay because he is a freshman and he's got to learn. And I would feel weirder about this if he didn't have ups and downs and make mistakes and have bad games, because I think that's the best way for a player to learn. And I think this last outing was one that could probably hurt confidence. And so they've got to be careful in the way that they coach him through that. But most of these performances aren't ones where it's like, oh my gosh, like this kid is, he's going to lose his confidence. He's going to be broken. I think a lot of these are just like, hey, dude, this is how we learn how to become a better player. And so I think it's unfortunate for Nebraska, and especially the way Raiola started, where we were like, this dude could be like kind of a freshman phenom. But in terms of his development, I think that this is going to pay dividends for the next couple years that he's on campus.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. I agree. I think they're going to get bowl eligible. I would like them to. I think they could get a decent bowl. They get up to 7-8 wins maybe.
Yep.
But like you said, these are matchup opponents. So those games could really go either way. And we'll have to see how they play down the stretch. But hopefully they get that win over UCLA and can kind of breathe a little bit for the first time in a few years. Second team for stock down, I want to talk about Auburn. It's not going well. Like you went out on a limb to give Hugh Freeze another chance in the SEC. You're supposed to be good offensively when you bring in Hugh Freeze. Like that's what you're selling. You're selling high-powered offenses. They don't have that. They have turnover-prone quarterbacks. Doesn't matter who's quarterback. Auburn's now lost 4 straight games. In 5 of their last 6, they have not beaten a power conference team, despite 4 of those losses coming by 10 points or less. Hugh Freeze has said like he's never had a season like this in 32 years of coaching, where not a single game ended up going our way in the end. We're not making enough plays in critical moments. I mean, it is possible here. We talk about like, look at the rest of the schedule for Nebraska. Could Auburn lose out? So they've got Kentucky. So Kentucky, matchup opponent, like that's a chance. But they've got Alabama, A&M, Vanderbilt ranked. They've got a 5-1, currently 5-1 ULM team. Like Louisiana Monroe's good. That's their schedule. This is not going to be a good season. Like they're definitely not going bowling. But like, the buyout is prohibitive. We don't need to necessarily say that like Hugh Freeze is on the hot seat, but you can clearly say like this is not working the way that anyone anticipated it would by bringing him back into the SEC and saying with all of his baggage, it's still worth it. It doesn't seem to be worth it so far.
No, and I'll say, Hugh Freeze, you let me down because we were perfectly ready to throw in the towel on Missouri and stop talking about them. Yeah. You had them on the ropes and you let go. And it's really unfortunate for our sake that we still got to entertain this Mizzou thing. Now, for the Auburn perspective on this, everything you said is 100% accurate. Like this is supposed to be a guy who is like, king of offense, whatever you want to call him. You bring in Peyton Thorne, who had many struggles in the Big Ten at Michigan State. And it's like, oh yeah, we're going to turn this guy around. The last 2 years is like, no, he looks like the exact same player. Like this is the same guy. And it hasn't looked very good. The idea that you lose close games is something that I look at. And I say that is 100% a training, coaching, motivation thing. Because the players play well enough to be in these games and like you don't have a plan for them or you have not motivated them or trained them in a way that they can close them out. I look at that in a lot of ways, and I point to coaching there. And then here's the other thing that I do think it's interesting for Auburn is if you follow the transfer portal or you follow recruiting at all, they have had some money to throw around. They've been able to get some names, and they've been able to entertain some recruits, potentially get some flips here as we get closer to signing day that a team this bad should not get. And next year is going to be the one. I think if they have another bad season, there's going to be a lot of people who are donating saying, I'm not giving you any more money because we get you these great players and you don't know what to do with them. That is a very dangerous spot to be in.
Well, and just that, like, you opted not to bring in a quarterback.
Yeah.
You know, like, you're making decisions when you do have the support that could help you make a decision another way. You're saying, nope, we're good. And then it's not working out. So you're right. I mean, the next year is going to be huge for Hugh Freeze. I mean, I think he's going to enter, assuming the season ends the way we think it's going to end. I mean, the seat will be warm. Regardless of buyouts, regardless of buyout structure and things like that. Like, Auburn has always set the market on buyouts and the willingness to make changes. So we'll have to see. Joshua, the last team for Stockdown is a team that you have had very strong feelings about all season long. So I want to give you the floor.
All right. So how about Michigan? Okay. And
how about them?
They lose to Illinois. Really in a game where Illinois out Michigan, I think is the best way to put it. They ran the ball pretty well. They only threw it for like 80 yards. They were able to get some takeaways. They had a big special teams play that factored into it. Like, Illinois did the Michigan thing to the University of Michigan. They have a real problem right now. And we alluded to it earlier, and I'll get to the makeup of the coaching staff here in a second. If you flip on that tape from the game against Illinois, I think you look at the offense and said they left a lot out there. I don't think they're giving Khalil Mullings the ball enough, which is a problem in and of itself. And if you have to drop back 32 times to win a football game as the University of Michigan with that quarterback room, you're probably setting yourself up for a loss there. But I'm looking at Colston Loveland. He's getting open. There's some other guys who are getting open. It's just not accurate, right? Like, none of the quarterbacks have really worked. And then for a defense, and I thought their pass defense played better. It's been an issue for them this year, but that came at the expense of giving up 5 yards of carry. And if you take out the big play on the fake punt, still giving up a little bit around 4 yards of carry for that defense in that front with some first rounders out there. Doesn't make a lot of sense. But I look at Kirk Campbell, the offensive coordinator, and I look at Wink Martindale, the defensive coordinator, and it is a steep drop-off from what we've seen the last 3 years from that coaching staff. The execution is not where it needs to be. I think the offensive game plan is more of I'm the coach and I know what to call, rather than these are the players and this is what they do well. That's always bad. And Wink is just like a stubborn guy who's been around football for a long time and likes to run what he likes to run. It is a little bit ugly. And Jake Butt, one of our friends, he played football at Michigan, does a great job on the Big Ten Network, was an All-American tight end there. He's scared they might not make a bowl game this year. And it feels really dramatic when you hear it. But like, this game they've got this weekend against Michigan State, they're sitting at literally the same spot. Yeah. Michigan State's played much better these last couple weeks. We know that rivalry is just like a nasty, gritty rivalry. Who knows? They're in dire straits right now, coming off of a championship a year ago. Yeah, they are. And I think that championship and uncertainty hanging over them with NCAA stuff, is why Sherome got the job and why they wanted him to get the job. But I agree. I mean, I think there's going to be some hard staff decisions that he's going to have to make because of what you just outlined. They're not playing to the strength of their personnel. They're not adjusting in game. And they're not playing, like, they're not doing anything well right now. And I think that's the biggest problem. I think they're going to end up having to cycle through all of these quarterbacks like again, because they're all continuing to make mistakes. The ones that can throw the ball a little bit, throw it to the other team or fumble. Yeah. And then Alex Orji, when you put him in the game, you have no threat of a pass game. So and he doesn't run it that well either. Right. So it's just like, there's nothing you can do at this point with your personnel. We'll see what they do with quarterback for this game. I know Sherman Moore said he wasn't sure, but if they had to make the decision on Monday, it would have been Jack Tuttle. We'll see, but you're right. Michigan State coming off probably their most complete game of the season, and a really nice win
over Iowa last weekend. So there's a lot at stake in Jonathan Smith's first rivalry game, Sharon Moore's first rivalry game as the head coach. But yes, absolutely, that is a staff and coordinator decisions to keep an eye on, because obviously they're not going to make a change for Sharon.
Let me just get this to you real quick. So we mentioned Michigan State coming up. Then they've got Oregon. They've got Indiana, Northwestern, and Ohio State. So they have to beat Michigan State and Northwestern. And I don't know how much of a shot we're giving them in those other games.
Wow.
Those are all teams that are, like squarely in the Big Ten championship college football playoff hunt.
So this is the game this weekend.
This will determine a lot.
Yeah.
And I don't want to be this guy, because I think the character of the players up at the University of Michigan, the brotherhood that they've built over the last couple of years, really changes this idea. But I mentioned the fact that they've got some high draft picks, and if they lose this football game, like, who is to say that those guys finish out the season? It's not an uncommon thing to see players say that they want to wrap it up, and I wouldn't blame anybody for doing it. I'm not saying that I have any information telling me that they would, but like, that's the part of the season that we're starting to get into, and it would feel like really strange to see a team that just won a championship get to that point in the bad season curve. So huge game, a lot of stakes in this one coming up this weekend. But Nicole, I think it's time to get to WTF on RTF. And we all saw this over the weekend if we're college football fans. It was the biggest game of the week. And there was a bad call in the Georgia-Texas game, and Texas fans got a little bit sad about it. And so they started throwing things onto the field, bottles of water, beer cans. Somebody said there was a battery down there. Cannot confirm or deny whether that is true. But you see all of this debris, very childish, very disappointing. Sark's over there like, hey, guys, calm down. Don't do that. It got to the point, the SEC fined them. The university is using their cameras, which people are like, oh, they don't have these cameras. You guys don't understand. The security thing is a real thing. They got these cameras. They can like zoom in on your face. They're revoking tickets. And then it also got the call overturned. Now, whether it was because of the bottles on the field or the time that the officials had to huddle up after that, it was a whole thing. Nicole, what are your thoughts?
Yeah. So, I mean, I definitely still have questions about exactly what went down. And if that call, so it was a pass interference call. And then after all of this delay, the officials were like, actually, that was wrong. And like basically picked up the flag. Would they have done that? Did they decide that before the debris was thrown? Like, we don't know the order of events. And that's actually what like Georgia officials are still upset about, even though they won the game. Their athletic director, Josh Brooks, put out a long statement basically saying that, like, what is the timing here? We're not getting clarity from the SEC. And this is just not how it should go, even though I personally think that was the correct decision.
Yeah.
They didn't get to it in the right way. And we've talked about that a number of times. Miami, Virginia Tech, the end of that game as well. So I still think the SEC has some stuff that they have to clean up. Pun intended. Also, my favorite part of this is, well, so I have two favorite parts. One, the lesson that people are absolutely going to take away from this is throw a tantrum.
Yes.
If a call goes against you, it might work. They did not get penalized in the game,
which is crazy
for the fans doing this. And the call got overturned. So it's teaching our children a bad lesson about temper tantrums. The other thing that I loved was Matthew McConaughey, who is the Minister of Culture for Texas, put out a statement about this, trying to be like, hey, guys, I love you. Atmosphere was awesome in Austin, but like, this isn't cool. Don't throw stuff. We're better than this, which for some reason, I just thought was like the funniest and most like peak college football thing that could have happened.
He said throwing stuff on the field, not cool. It's like Minister of Culture is a crazy title to have. I agree with you on the tantrum thing.
You know,
I know. I agree with you on the like, do we see more of this, because it worked out in this scenario, and it is setting a bad precedent. And I do want to make this point because I do think it's really important. Bad officiating occurs in every one of these games. And if we're being honest, like, this has been a really rough year for college football officiating. I don't think it's been great. The one thing I will say is I think a lot of us, players, coaches, fans, can live with bad calls if we understand the process and the process is maintained. Where I think you really start to lose the trust of people is when you start going off script in the process of how you officiate these things. It was the reason why the Virginia Tech Miami thing was such a big deal, was they probably had the wrong call initially, But going to the tape, like, it didn't convince anybody that beyond a doubt they were making the right call by changing it. In this situation, we have no idea what happened and what triggered the officials to pick up the flag. But the idea here is I can live with a bad call as long as I understand the process and it's consistent in how you officiate.
This is the same thing with anything. I'm as you're talking, I'm thinking about like the selection committee not putting Florida State in the bracket last year.
Yes.
That wasn't consistent. They had them in the top 4 the previous week. And now suddenly, like, they're just so much of a worse team without Jordan Travis. Like, again, it's a process thing. It's about transparency. It's about explanation. That did not happen, which again is just going to give people the wrong takeaway coming out of this. But it didn't ultimately impact the game.
No, it didn't.
Because it was the correct call. The right team won this game. The team that dominated this game won the game. That leads us to power rankings presented by City. This week, we are power ranking the best teams in the SEC, which is actually very hard to do. There are no unbeaten teams in the SEC anymore. And there's actually only 2 teams that are unbeaten in SEC play, and they're playing this week. That's where, if you look at the graphic, Texas A&M and LSU, I've got them. Well, actually, this is Joshua's ranking. He's got them as the 3rd and 4th best teams in the SEC. So, Joshua, walk us through the power rankings of how you see the Southeastern Conference right now.
Yes, and I'll tell you right now, like, and this goes for every team in college football, very flawed. These are very flawed teams. They all have some pimples. And I think in a given week, like, our opinions can change drastically about this, but I'm putting Georgia at number 1. We talked about the Carson Beck problem that they have. I do think they ran the football better, but like, they have a bit of an offense issue this year. However, when their defense plays the way that we saw them play, I think it's very difficult for anybody in the country to try to go out there and beat them, and certainly anybody in the SEC. That's why I have them at 1. I have Texas at 2, and I was trying not to be dramatic about the way they got beat because they look bad in the offensive trenches. Both of their quarterbacks looked like they had no idea what the hell was going on for vast portions of that ball game. But their defense did play well, right? Like, that was the one thing I really questioned, and I thought they played well, and I think Sark can get the offense back on track there. I'm going with A&M here at 3. I like A&M's defense. I think offensively, they've surprised me a little bit in their ability to move the ball. And I kind of looked at them sideways after they lost to Notre Dame in week 1, and they've played very good football since then. LSU is a very similar story to me. I think I want to trust A&M more than I trust LSU, but their defense has started to round out just a little bit here in the last couple of weeks. And again, after week 1, I think a lot of people were pointing fingers and laughing at Brian Kelly. They've played some solid football. I think the first few weeks of the season, they had some issues, some really tight games, probably could have lost to South Carolina, but they didn't. They're sitting here right now. Good ball team. And then it starts to get a little bit thin here for me in the SEC. Do you like in Alabama? How do you feel about Tennessee? Do you think Vanderbilt might actually be better than Alabama or Tennessee? They got the win over Alabama. We don't know what happens against Tennessee, but I'm putting Tennessee in here. Nico, question mark.
Yeah,
roller coaster. A lot of up and down. I still think their defense has played pretty well, though. I do. And so, like I said, bunch of flawed teams, going to be fun races here in that conference. But if I had to rank them 1 through 5, this is what I'm going with.
So I agree with you, although I think I would have LSU as my 3rd best team for now.
That's fair.
I had them in my CFP projection because I think Garrett Nussmeier is the best non-Texas quarterback in the SEC. He's been insanely fun to watch. And the pass game that LSU has, which is what's going to be really interesting. We know we're going to preview that game in just a second. But I'm with you. I think we wrote off A&M and LSU based on week 1 losses. And you know what? These teams are allowed to get better over the course of the season.
Yes,
they are. That's how
they
sports work. And especially in a new playoff format where you can get credit for that. You can figure things out. 1 loss is not a disqualifier. I think that's awesome. I also would have Tennessee above Alabama right now. Obviously, they just beat them. That was a game where it was like just whoever was less bad in that game. Like, I don't think I learned a ton about Tennessee by winning it, just that they didn't lose it. So jury's still out on some of those teams. We'll see how Vandy does against Texas this weekend. I mean, like that could be.
Kind of love it. Yeah.
I love it too. I kind of love it.
It's super interesting. I will say this on LSU, and we're literally about to get into these games here. I'm curious what the NFL people have to say about Garrett Nussmeier.
Me too.
Right? Like he's become a really intriguing prospect to me because he's played in a way that a lot of quarterbacks who had higher expectations have not played this year. So let's get right into it with some week 9 previews and picks against the spread here. We're going to start with number 8 LSU. They're taking on number 14 Texas A&M. A&M a 2.5 point favorite in that game, over under 53.5. And I think we should start off by asking the question. This has been the biggest game for Texas A&M since.
Definitely the biggest game against LSU. I mean, this could keep them, again, with one loss, but like this could set up a major clash with Texas at the end of the season.
Mm-hmm.
That they could be playing for a playoff spot. I mean, it feels, gosh, I don't know. I don't know. Biggest game since what? I mean, the attention.
Since Johnny Manziel beat Alabama?
I was kind of thinking that. I'm sure there's something that was like maybe a top 15 game or showdown or something, but like, the Jimbo Fisher era, these 8-4 teams, like there definitely were big games. They didn't win them, but like in terms of this could go either way. Yeah, maybe it is the Johnny Manziel teams because he always gave you a chance against the best teams in the country. And what's interesting about this game and really where I think it's going to be decided is the quarterback position for A&M. Again, they don't have Johnny Manziel. They don't have someone who is that sure of a thing. This is Connor Wegman, who we've seen be really, really good. We've seen him be not very good, and we've seen him be okay. So like which version of him shows up in this game? Obviously they like to run the ball and they should be able to do that. LSU prefers to pass. They should be able to do that. I really think it's going to come down to Wegman because like I just said, I like Garrett Nussmeier a lot. I trust him, and we've seen him come back in games with his back against the wall. Can Connor Wegman do that? Can he do it if he needs to? I mean, even in that game against Missouri, it was really that run game that opened everything else up and allowed him to do what he needed to do to get the win as a passer. But I just don't know. He's just such a wild card in this matchup. And I really think it's going to come down to this. And it could go either way. I know I'm higher on LSU coming in, but I really think like this will clarify, the third best team from the SEC for now. And like the team that will have a really good chance of making a playoff, because this is going to be a really high quality win for whoever wins it.
Agreed on all fronts there. It's I'm believing that Connor Wegman is going to have a solid game here. And I mentioned LSU's defense is starting to play better. Like I still do have questions about like how high quality can that defense be? And this might be a game where we find that out. I'm gonna roll with A&M here. As you mentioned, we're talking about potential college football playoff, and we're also talking about the stakes in their rivalry game, as you mentioned, against Texas at the end of the year. For folks who are unfamiliar, this was one of the most heated rivalries in college football, and then it went away, and now we're getting it back. And like it could mean much more if Texas A&M can come into that game, unscathed in conference. So I'm leaning toward A&M to be able to pull this off. I like Mike Elko a lot.
I do too. And I think, we're seeing why they hired him already with the growth that we've seen from the season. I'm going to take the Tigers in this one, even though they have not fared all that well away from home in the Brian Kelly era. Gotta, oh man, am I talking myself into A&M actually? I feel like I am.
You might be.
All right, I'm going to eventually.
Don't let me influence you.
I think you changed my mind, and then also thinking about like Brian Kelly's, they've been good at home, but this game is at Kyle Field, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So, okay. All right. I'm going to take the Aggies as well. Let's get into an interesting game for a past Aggies opponent, Notre Dame.
Yes.
The team that beat them in week 1 and then lost to NIU and has been playing some really good football in recent weeks. They're playing Navy. This is the first of the 2 service academies on their schedule. They're favored by 12.5 points. The game is at a neutral site at MetLife Stadium. And this is where it gets really interesting for the Irish. We have said this all along, even right after they lost to NIU. If they went out, they're in. A 1-loss Notre Dame team, no matter who the loss is, especially early in the season, is going to make the college football playoff. We didn't know that Navy and Army would be unbeaten as we sit here in late October, that these teams are actually quite good. Navy can even throw the ball a little bit. They had a really nice win over Memphis earlier this season. I want to know if you see a path for Navy to win this game. Well, maybe even just at least cover. I mean, this is a good football team, but I think Notre Dame, with the way they've been able to open up the pass game, should win. But what needs to happen for Navy to have a chance?
Well, first off, I do think Navy covers in this game. I know Notre Dame has played much better. Listen, I think if they're not scheming dudes wide open, the pass game is really, it's not that big. They've done a good job of incorporating some RPOs, which they needed to do, influence the game with the run game, get the ball into a clear picture for Riley Leonard. He can throw it quickly. That's been really good for them. Their drop back game has really just been a 3-step drop and then find a guy who's open in the underneath, maybe intermediate. Getting the ball downfield has been a challenge. And I think if I'm a defensive coordinator, I understand I can probably get sticky in coverage because I don't think they have a bunch of personnel that scares me on the edges, and they want to throw it quick, and I'm going to make the windows tight. And I think that Navy's a team that can do that. Flip side, Notre Dame's got a really good defense that's also extremely banged up, and they're used to playing Navy. And so they kind of have a plan in how they want to approach this game week every year. I played Navy when I was in college. It is a very difficult offense to have to go against. We practiced without a football that week because the goal is if you're supposed to tackle a dive, you tackle the dive. If you're supposed to be on the quarterback, be on the quarterback. And if you have the pitch man, you've got the pitch man. Just do your job. But now you start to incorporate young players in there, guys who are playing more reps because their rotation's gotten slimmer. It's hard to stay engaged mentally in that way. And then just from watching the Navy tape, this is also a team that'll line up in their typical wing formations, and then they'll shift and they'll get into a regular spread formation. And so now you've got to flip your paradigm of, okay, this was our defense that we were playing against them, which is not defense we typically play, into we're facing a more traditional offense, and they have shown that they will throw the football or run the football out of these formations. And how do we want to defend that? It is tricky. It's really tricky. Yeah. The idea that they throw the football 12 times a game on average now completely changes your mentality, because before you could at least lock in for 60 on this is different, but we're going to do our job. And now you've got to do the ping pong back and forth thing. It sets up in a weird way that I think that Navy can cover the 12.5 in this one.
I think I'm going to take Notre Dame because I do think that they've figured a lot out with Riley Leonard as a passer. Again, it's been up and down with him, but we were waiting to see this. It was a transfer quarterback who was injured and missed spring. It was going to take some time for him to figure out what that looks like, build some chemistry with some of the receivers. So I'm going to take the Irish here. Although I do think Navy is a harder out than Army. So I'm going to take them to cover, though.
Okay. As we get into this stat real quick.
You're going to try to convince me? Okay.
So how about this for Marcus Freeman? The number is 6. He's never won 6 straight games as the head coach at Notre Dame, and they're on a 5-game win streak right now.
That's fine. I have faith.
All right. Okay. Just wanted to throw that in there.
All right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
All right.
Let's get into look at you. I was trying to influence. All right. Let's get into this last one here. This is going to be the game that we have. Number 3, Penn State. They're taking a trip to Camp Randall in prime time. They're playing Wisconsin. Penn State 6.5-point favorites in this game. Now, Wisconsin has been extremely impressive over this last 3-game stretch. They've outscored opponents 117-16. It feels like they figured out how to do the air run thing, right? Not air raid, but they've incorporated the run game. Tawi Walker, their running back, has been really impressive in short yardage and goal line situations. They brought the tight ends out. They brought the fullback out. They've done a masterful job from that standpoint. And on defense, they played pretty well. I do think the caveat to all of that is the opponents have not been all that impressive. The teams that they've been able to whoop up on in this 3-game stretch are teams that they probably should be able to assert dominance over. So it begs that question. Flip it over to the Penn State side. This is a team that is number 3 in the country. I think, and I'd say I think because I'm one of these people, I think people are questioning, are they really the 3rd best team in college football? Drew Allers had some moments where he's played very well. He's also had some moments where it's like, I don't know how much it's really clicking for him. Defensively, I think they've been vulnerable because they love to play man-to-man, and it's gotten them caught up a little bit. And I like watching back the tape against USC. Lincoln Riley, for all of the things that I've said about him, like, dude still knows how to put together a pretty good offensive game plan. He took advantage of it. Tyler Warren, phenomenal. Low-key should be in the Heisman conversation, but let's not get too far into that. Who do you think wins this game? What's it going to come down to?
So I think that Penn State can and should win this game, even though this is a tough place to play. I do think we learned something about their ability to win a one-score game, come back in a game, win on the road against USC a few weeks ago. I do think that sometimes they can be too one-dimensional with Tyler Warren. I do think they might not be the third best team in the country. I feel like their ceiling is maybe more limited than everyone else. But I think that as Wisconsin has figured some things out, that makes this more of a challenge, and we can actually learn more about Penn State in this game. I do think Drew Aller could use a big game. I think we've seen, kind of some ups and downs from him, or maybe expecting him to be a little bit more prolific than we've seen him this year. I think that Nick Singleton and Katron Allen need to get going. I know that hasn't necessarily been the case in all of their games. And I feel like some of it's just like this idea of what we saw from them as freshmen, of what they're capable of. But to me, that is something I would really like to see Penn State develop. And I think in this game would maybe have an opportunity to do that. But I like what you're saying about the style of play for Wisconsin, finally something clicking as an offensive identity for them. So I think this is going to be a close game. I don't think – so I'm going to take Wisconsin with the points, but I think Penn State's going to win the game.
I think that's a play here for me. Camp Randall at night. I do think it gets spooky. Wisconsin is finding their stride here. And I almost want to pick them to actually pull off the upset, but I don't know if they're going to have it in the tank there. But I do have legitimate concerns about Penn State from an offensive standpoint. And I know part of the job of the coordinator is to elevate through scheme. But like, there's this idea to me that at Penn State, I think you should be able to just punch people in the mouth more and be successful doing that. And they haven't really showed that they can do that. And I don't know if it's the trust in the offensive line. I don't know if it's their belief in their quarterback. I mean, they will put multiple people in there outside of Drew Aller to take snaps. We have seen Tyler Warren not only snap the football, but take snaps. He's thrown the football. He's a high school quarterback. They will put Singleton back there, and they will direct snap it to him. They'll bring in the backup quarterback, Bo Perbula, and they'll use him in packages. And I think it's a really strange thing to do when you should just have the personnel to be pretty straight up about 99% of the time. And when you bring in Andy Kotelnicki, I think it's part of the experience is that you've made a decision that you're not going to be. But it just feels weird for Penn State football. Ultimately, I think they're a better team. They are certainly a more talented football team. I have these doubts that just linger in my mind, and I think Wisconsin makes it real tight for them.
Yeah. Well, we've also seen Penn State win games that they were controlling by not that much. So yeah, it's gonna be a fun one. Can't wait. We'll have pregame coverage on NBC starting at 7:00 Eastern for that one. So we'll get you all set. Can't wait to watch that one. Before we go, JP, it's time for our underdog picks. Last week was a rough one for some of our picks. They did not do as well.
Let's not talk about it.
They typically have. Well,
you'd still be up units if you followed the picks. Let's just say that and move on.
True. Okay, so mine is, I was kind of cheating. I'm surprised they have plus points on this. BYU is the underdog at UCF this week. They're so I'm going to take them plus 2.5 points. Jake Retzlaff, love watching him. Love watching like the chaos that is BYU, the offense, the heroics that they needed last week. BYU. He is encouraging people to say it. He is a Jewish quarterback at BYU, School of Mormons. It is awesome. It is really cool. They've embraced him. He's embraced them. And they are unbeaten. Like, it's just really cool. This is an important game for the Big 12 race. They want to stay atop the rankings. Can't believe they're plus points. So I'm taking BYU plus 2.5 at UCF.
Yeah. Seeing them getting 2.5 to me was it was cause to almost take this as one of my picks. I mean, I think Vegas was looking at last week and how Iowa State looked against UCF and then flip it over to BYU. And it took a real late game, bad tackling situation for them to pull off a victory.
Or a great great throw and run and
It wasn't.
catch and
It
run
wasn't.
and
It was.
all
It
of that.
was
It was a great
it
play.
was the epidemic of college football, which is bad tackling, that
Or
led to
something
that
in
win.
between. Maybe
Nicole,
something in between.
I'm Nicole. As a former defensive player, I throw up every week. There's a situation where I get a barf bag and I throw up because I watch this bad tackling and it is sick. It's sick. We're losing the fundamentals of football. All that to say, I do think this is a phenomenal pick. I do, because I think that BYU will not have another nasty game like that where it takes some late game heroics to try to win it. All right. Let me get you this one. How about Syracuse? They're a 5.5-point dog. They're taking on undefeated Pitt. Syracuse is going to win this football game. Let's start with their quarterback, Kyle McCord. People who watch football in the Midwest, you would be very familiar with him. He was a quarterback at Ohio State last year. He's there at Syracuse. He's a stat machine right now, second nationally in passing. He throws the ball more than anyone in college football with 47 attempts per game, coming off of a bye week to let that shoulder of his rest. He's been pretty sharp this year, generally efficient. It's a passing game that makes a lot of sense for him because they throw underneath, try to take some shots. And I think that they can pull that off even with defensive wizard on the other side. I think the offense stays for them. Syracuse has also won both of their games outright as dogs, and I think that really matters in this one. And for Pitt, as well as they have played, and the fact that they are undefeated in this crazy year of college football, I'm giving all the credit in the world. But over Power 4 teams, their wins are by a combined 17 points. These have been slim margins. And I think if this game is another one that gets out into the deep waters late, I'm rolling with Syracuse to pull off the upset here.
I like this pick. Kyle McCord's had an awesome season. Like, I use him as an example of the portal being good, giving people a fresh start, a new scheme, a new fit. So that's been awesome to see. I feel like Pitt has absolutely been flying under the radar, and this is a game where people are maybe going to pay attention, and we'll see. So I like the pick. I don't know if they'll pull it off, but I like the 5.5 points as well. So that's a smart pick. We'll see if we make you guys money. We'll see if we've correctly predicted places where there's going to be upsets, but surely there will be more fields that get rushed this weekend. We already saw one this week with Kennesaw State. Shout out to the Owls' first FBS win this week. Bodes well as we head into the rest of week 9. For Joshua Perry, I'm Nicole Auerbach. We will see you next week with more Rushing the Field.